Thank you very much. One of the dangers of going this late in the afternoon is that much has already been said. And indeed, these were my notes for my speech. Simon got to them before I did, so I'm going to endorse everything that he said. And at that point, I should probably sit down, but I can't because there are still a few minutes left. There are actually a number of important things to be said on this subject, but as there's a little bit of cross-dressing between the two panels, let me actually return to the first issue, which is the competitiveness of the UK, and just talk about that for a second. I don't normally actually talk about my own company. I'm much more comfortable talking about BIAC and about the CBI. But in terms of the UK, I would like to say that the tax system is definitely a net positive. It's not what brings us here. It may be what keeps us here. And some of the changes have clearly been very advantageous. But given what's said about a lot of American companies, I think it's very important to emphasize that actually, we're here because we want to be, because it's an important market, and because there are good businesses, and there are good services, and there are good people here. So we have 20,000 employees, we have 3,000 engineers, we have 450 software engineers, we have 25 plants and R&D facilities. This is a serious place for us to be. And I think for most American companies, most foreign companies who invest in the UK, that's true. It is a good market, it is a big economy, and yes, it has a good tax system. So I think it's important to say those things. Okay, let me switch back to the topic that I was meant to be talking about, which is cooperation. I think it's very useful that Sharon talked about the EU because I spend so much time right at the moment doing the OECD. That's all I tend to think about. But actually, there is a lot of good stuff which has gone on there. And I would pay tribute to what Sharon has done in terms of transparency. I don't always agree with absolutely every aspect of it. But there is no doubt that we've been on a journey now over the past 5 or 10 years. And as Simon said, transparency is, in the end, actually better for companies, because one of the things which has happened, particularly over the past 5 years, is a severe breakdown in trust in business, and particularly a severe breakdown in trust in big business. And one of the numbers that David Gauke gave at the beginning, actually, there is a lot of tax which is paid in the UK, across Europe. That's part of telling our story. But also, if there are things that we feel less comfortable talking about, then maybe we should be asking questions about those. And some of you will know that some of the work that I've done with the CBI, but also some of the work I've done with BIAC, has gone into developing a statement of tax principles. Part of that talks about what business should not do. Tax activity should, to a large extent, co-locate, as David Gauke was saying, as Simon said, with economic activity. That's an important principle. We should not be doing tax things which have no economic substance. I think most businesses believe that. I think most people who aren't in business don't believe that. And therefore, actually articulating that and saying it, even though to us it sounds very simple, is a very important thing to do. But one of the other things that the Statement of Principles say is, and again, this goes to Simon's point about not necessarily just numbers, or not even numbers in some case, but more of a narrative which explains this, is actually saying why we do things and why our taxes are the way they are. I mean, I will tell you, tax is a cost. There's no two ways about that. And to go back to a point which was raised earlier, one of the reasons why US companies have such large cash piles outside of the US is because there is a huge disparity. You take the Irish rate, take an ETR of 15%, take the UK rate of 20% next year. That is still a 15 percentage point difference, and actually more once you count in state taxes, almost a 20% difference between tax rates. What logical person would make themselves uncompetitive, in a sense, if they could deploy their cash somewhere else? So I think it's important to, again, to make those points. But transparency is about talking about that. So I think that's one important point to make. Again, with some of the other things coming back to BEPS, again, this is a really important project. Some people say, well, business must only be involved in this to try and slow it down. That isn't true. BIAC, as I hope Achim would tell you, you can ask him a question about it if you want, has been very constructively engaged in trying to make this project as good as it can be. And people say, why would that be? Again, isn't it in your interest to go back to the good old days? The good old days have gone. We cannot go back to the good old days, whatever they were. As people have said, the BRICS are involved in this. The G20 is a remarkably important organization. If you look at the GDP of the OECD countries, it's going down like that. You look at the trend line of the BRICS, it's going up like that. If we can get an agreement between a much larger group of countries as to what the right tax rules should be, then that's going to be good for business, because instability has come into the international tax system, which is bad not just for countries, but also bad for companies. So again, working on these issues, working on these items is very important. I too am not going to run through the action items that Achim mentioned very briefly, other than to say that, again, we've been working hard on them, that we congratulate the OECD on the work they've done. Is there still complexity in some of the proposals? Yes, there could be. But, you know, we can continue to work on that, and that's very important. I just want to say one final thing, which Paul Collier may well also touch on, which is the importance of developing countries, less developed countries. So we're not talking now about the BRICS. These are, again, for companies like mine, large growth areas. So a lot of the focus tends to be on the extractives. And actually, the extractives have done a huge amount of good work here. You look at the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, you look at a number of those types of things. Actually, people are being very open there. But it's also necessary to recognize that actually a lot of businesses outside of those areas have an interest in these countries too. Why? Because they're potential markets. Again, if you look at the trend line of Africa, it is, you know, it's up, and the potential is enormous. And what do we want when we go there? We want stable markets. We want the rule of law. We want a society which can collect enough tax to pay for itself. And therefore, you know, again, we're interested in that. And one of the areas that we've cooperated with NGOs on and with others is on capacity building, helping tax authorities in those countries to be able to run their own tax systems, to have the rules that they need to do. So in terms of cooperation, I think there's a huge area out there that governments, civil society, and business can all work together on to actually make for a better world. And I know that sounds pious. I know that it sounds, some people aren't going to believe me. But actually, you know, if we want to sell more things, if we want to do more business, and yes, actually, if we want to do a bit more good, then cooperation is going to be the way to do that, rather than battling the whole time. Thank you.